The nanny was hired to take care of the widowed millionaire's daughter, but he froze when he saw how she hugged her, just like the mother the little girl had lost. The Drake mansion stood like a silent sentinel on the outskirts of Savannah, its grand colonial architecture a testament to old money and older secrets. Massive oak trees draped in Spanish moss lined the long driveway, their twisted branches creating dancing shadows on the gravel path to passers-by. It was just another historic estate that dotted the Georgia countryside, but to those who lived within its walls, it had become a mausoleum of memories. Samuel Drake stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, a tumbler of bourbon held loosely in his hand. At 42, his once youthful features had hardened. Deep lines etched around his eyes that rarely showed emotion anymore. The amber liquid in his glass caught the late afternoon sunlight, creating golden ripples that reminded him of Margaret's hair. Margaret, even thinking her name sent a sharp pain through his chest. "Mr. Drake," Mrs. Jenkins' voice cut through his thoughts. The elderly housekeeper had served the Drake family for over 20 years, her stoic presence a constant in the ever-shifting landscape of his life. "Another one has quit." Samuel didn't need to ask what she meant. In the 6 months since Margaret's death, they'd gone through 7 nannies for Charlotte. None lasted more than a week. "What was the reason this time?" he asked, not turning away from the window. "Same as the others, sir. She said the child won't speak, won't eat properly, and stares at the wall for hours." Mrs. Jenkins' voice softened slightly. "And she mentioned the nightmares." Samuel closed his eyes. Charlotte's screams in the night had become a haunting melody in the house, a terrible reminder of what they'd lost. His 5-year-old daughter hadn't spoken a word since the day they'd told her that Mommy wasn't coming home. "I've taken the liberty of contacting the agency again," Mrs. Jenkins continued, her voice returning to its efficient tone. "They're sending someone tomorrow morning." "Fine," Samuel replied, finally turning to face her. "Have the quarterly reports been delivered to my office?" Mrs. Jenkins nodded, understanding the conversation about Charlotte was over, in the month since Margaret's accident. Samuel had retreated further into his work, building his hotel empire with ruthless efficiency, as if each new property could fill the void she'd left behind. "Yes, sir. And Mr. Lawson called about the Miami acquisition. Tell him I'll call back tomorrow," Samuel said, turning back to the window. "I need to check on Charlotte before dinner." After Mrs. Jenkins left, Samuel drained his glass in one swallow, feeling the bourbon burn down his throat. He set the empty tumbler on his desk and made his way through the mansion's long corridors toward the east wing, where Charlotte's room was located. The hallway was lined with photographs of happier times. Margaret's radiant smile seemed to follow him as he walked past the family portraits. In one, taken just last Christmas, she held Charlotte on her lap, both of them laughing as they opened presents. 7 months later, Margaret was gone, victim of what the police called a tragic accident, her car veering off the road on a rainy night, plunging into the river where she drowned. Samuel paused outside Charlotte's door, gathering the strength to face his daughter's silent grief. He knocked softly before entering. The room was a child's paradise, or at least it had been. A canopied bed fit for a princess stood against one wall, shelves lined with dolls and stuffed animals that hadn't been touched in months. Charlotte sat on the window seat, her small frame silhouetted against the dying light, a book open on her lap, though her gaze was fixed on the gardens below. "Hey, princess," Samuel said softly. Charlotte didn't respond, didn't even turn to acknowledge his presence. Her blonde curls, so like her mother's, hung limply around her face, which had grown thin over the months of picking at her food. Samuel crossed the room and sat beside her, following her gaze to the rose garden that Margaret had lovingly tended. Now Mrs. Jenkins had the gardener maintain it, but it lacked the touch that had made it special. "I hear we're getting a new nanny tomorrow," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "Maybe this one will make those special pancakes you like." Nothing, not even a flicker of interest in her dull blue eyes. Samuel sighed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. Charlotte flinched at his touch, a tiny movement that cut him to the core. He withdrew his hand, the rejection another reminder of his failure as a father. Margaret had been the one who knew how to comfort her, how to make her laugh. Without her, he was lost. "Dinner will be ready soon," he said, standing up. "Try to eat something tonight, okay?" He waited for a response that didn't come, then walked toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he heard a soft thud. Turning, he saw that Charlotte had dropped her book on the floor. For a moment, he thought it was an accident, but then she slid off the window seat and climbed into her bed, pulling the covers over her head, her way of saying she wouldn't be coming down for dinner. Again, back in his study, Samuel poured another drink and settled behind his massive mahogany desk. The Drake Hotel Group's financial reports awaited his review, numbers and projections that once excited him, now merely a distraction from the hollow ache in his chest. The mansion creaked and groaned around him, settling into the night. Once, these sounds had been comforting, the voice of a home filled with love and laughter. Now, they were just reminders of how empty the place had become, how the life had drained from its walls just as it had from his heart. Tomorrow, another nanny would arrive, likely doomed to fail. Like all the others, Samuel took a long swallow of bourbon, wondering if anything would ever break through the silence that had engulfed their lives since that rainy night when everything changed. Little did he know that fate was about to knock on his door in the form of a young woman with a mysterious past and hauntingly familiar eyes. Paige Sullivan stood at the wrought iron gates of the Drake mansion, a crumpled newspaper clipping clutched in her hand. The job posting was simple: live-in nanny for a 5-year-old girl, generous salary, immediate start. Yet something about it had called to her, like a half-remembered melody from a dream. "You sure about this, honey?" the taxi driver asked, eyeing the imposing estate. "Place gives me the creeps. Folks in town say it ain't been the same since Mrs. Drake passed." "I'm sure," Paige replied. Though she wasn't, at 25, her life had been a series of temporary jobs and rented rooms. Nothing permanent, nothing that felt like home. She couldn't explain the pull she felt toward this place, only that it was stronger than anything she'd felt before. The driver shrugged, helped her with her single suitcase, and left her standing before the gates. Paige pressed the intercom button, and after a moment's static, a crisp female voice answered, "Drake Residence. I'm Paige Sullivan. I have an interview with Mr. Drake about the nanny position." A pause. Then the gate swung open silently. Paige took a deep breath and started up the long driveway. Gravel crunching beneath her worn boots, the mansion loomed larger with each step, its windows like watchful eyes. Mrs. Jenkins met her at the door, a slender woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that missed nothing. Her gaze swept over Paige, taking in her simple dress, the scuffed suitcase, the nervous way she tucked a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. "You're early," Mrs. Jenkins said, her tone suggesting this was neither a virtue nor a vice, merely an observation. "I wanted to make a good impression," Paige replied with a small smile that wasn't returned. "Mr. Drake values punctuality, not eagerness. Follow me." Paige trailed behind the housekeeper through the mansion, trying not to gawk at the opulence around her. Crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, oil paintings in gilded frames. It was a far cry from the foster homes and cheap apartments of her childhood. Yet strangely, she felt no awe, only a disconcerting sense of déjà vu, as if she'd walked these halls before. Mrs. Jenkins paused outside a heavy oak door. "Wait here. I'll inform Mr. Drake of your arrival." Left alone, Paige found herself drawn to a family portrait on the wall. A handsome man with serious eyes stood behind a seated woman cradling an infant. The woman was beautiful, with long blonde hair and a smile that seemed to contain a secret known only to her. Paige leaned closer, an inexplicable tightness forming in her chest. "That was taken 4 years ago," Paige startled, turning to find a man standing in the doorway, the same man from the portrait. Though changed, Samuel Drake's face was harder now, his eyes shadowed with grief. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine." He cut her off, his tone suggesting it wasn't. "Come in." Samuel's study was masculine and austere, with leather furniture and bookshelves lining the walls. He gestured for her to sit in a chair across from his desk. "Mrs. Jenkins says you're here about the nanny position," he said, shuffling through papers without looking at her. "Do you have references?" Paige shifted uncomfortably. "Not professional ones, sir. I've worked as a waitress, a shop clerk, and I helped with children at the church where I was staying in Columbia." "But," she trailed off, seeing his frown deepen. "No formal childcare training? No degree?" "No, sir." Samuel looked up at last, his expression making it clear the interview was already over. "Miss Sullivan, my daughter requires—" A soft creak interrupted him. The door to the study had drifted open, and a small figure stood in the entrance. Charlotte Drake was tiny for her age, drowning in a blue dress that hung loose on her frame. Her blonde curls were limp, her face pale, but her eyes, wide and blue, were fixed on Paige with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "Charlotte," Samuel said, rising, "you should be with Mrs. Jenkins." Charlotte didn't acknowledge her father. Instead, she took a hesitant step into the room, then another, her gaze never leaving Paige's face. Something pulled at Paige's heart, a recognition she couldn't explain. She slid from her chair and knelt on the carpet, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Hello, Charlotte," she said softly. "I'm Paige." What happened next stunned both adults. Charlotte ran forward, closing the distance between them in a burst of movement that seemed impossible from such a frail-looking child. She threw her arms around Paige's neck. Burying her face in the young woman's shoulder, Samuel froze, his face draining of color. The way Charlotte had run, the way she'd tilted her head as she embraced Paige. It was identical to how she used to greet Margaret, a gesture he hadn't seen since his wife's death. Paige, equally surprised, instinctively wrapped her arms around the girl, a lump forming in her throat. The child trembled against her, small fingers clutching the fabric of her dress. "Charlotte," Samuel said again, his voice strained. The girl lifted her head and looked at Paige with tear-filled eyes. Then, in a voice hoarse from disuse, she whispered two words that sent a chill down Samuel's spine. "You're back." From the doorway, Mrs. Jenkins watched, her lips pressed into a thin line. The resemblance was uncanny, not in features exactly, but in gestures, in the tilt of her head, in the gentle way her hand rested on Charlotte's back. Just like someone she had seen years ago, visiting the mistress of the house in secret. "It seems my daughter has made her preference clear," Samuel said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "When can you start?" I brought my things today," Paige stammered, still holding Charlotte, who showed no signs of letting go. "Fine, Mrs. Jenkins will show you to your room and explain your duties." He turned away, moving to the window as if he couldn't bear to look at them any longer. "That will be all." As Paige rose with Charlotte still clinging to her, she caught Samuel watching their reflection in the glass, his expression a mixture of hope and fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. What none of them realized was that with Paige's arrival, the gears of fate had begun to turn, setting in motion revelations that would shake the Drake family to its core. The morning sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of Paige's room in the eastern wing of the mansion. She'd been at the Drake estate for a week now, and each day brought new surprises. The biggest was Charlotte herself, who, after months of silence according to Mrs. Jenkins, now followed Paige like a shadow, occasionally whispering words that seemed beyond her years. Paige sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair while watching Charlotte arrange dolls on the window seat. The child had insisted on spending the night in Paige's room again, claiming the "shadows don't come here." Samuel had reluctantly agreed, desperate for any progress with his daughter. "Miss Paige," Charlotte said without looking up from her dolls, "did you bring the music box?" Paige's hand stilled mid-brush. "What music box, sweetie?" Charlotte frowned, her small brow furrowing. "The one that plays Mommy's song. You always brought it before." A chill ran down Paige's spine. Charlotte often said things like this, comments that made no sense but were delivered with such certainty that they lingered in Paige's mind like fragments of a puzzle. "I don't have a music box," Paige said gently, "but maybe we could find one in the house." Charlotte shook her head, returning to her dolls. "It's not here anymore. The sad lady took it when she went to sleep in the ground." Paige set down her brush, deciding it was time to change the subject. "Let's get dressed for breakfast. Your father wants to eat with us this morning." As they made their way to the dining room, Paige felt the now familiar sensation of being watched. She turned to find Mrs. Jenkins standing in the shadows of the hallway, her sharp eyes following their every move. The housekeeper had made it clear from day one that she didn't approve of Paige. Though she'd never stated why outright, Samuel was already at the table when they arrived, the Wall Street Journal open beside his plate. He looked up as they entered, his expression softening momentarily at the sight of Charlotte holding Paige's hand. "Good morning," he said, setting the paper aside. "Did you sleep well?" The question was directed at Charlotte, but it was Paige who answered when the girl simply climbed into her chair. Much better, only one nightmare, and she went back to sleep quickly. Samuel nodded, relief briefly crossing his features. That's progress. Breakfast was a quiet affair, broken only by Charlotte's occasional whispered requests to Paige. The child still wouldn't speak directly to her father, a fact that clearly pained him. After they'd eaten, Samuel cleared his throat. I have meetings in town today. Charlotte has her reading lesson with Mrs. Abernathy at 10. Paige, could I have a word with you in my study before I leave? Paige followed him, aware of Mrs. Jenkins watching from the doorway as she passed. Samuel's study was cooler than the rest of the house, the heavy curtains keeping out the Georgia heat. He gestured for her to sit, then paced before the fireplace for a moment before speaking. My daughter seems to have formed an attachment to you, he said finally. I don't understand it, but I can't deny the improvement in her condition. I'm glad I can help, Paige replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. Samuel stopped pacing and looked directly at her for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived. Who are you, Miss Sullivan, really? The question caught her off guard. I don't understand what you mean. Your application was vague. No permanent address, no family contacts, a string of temporary jobs. His eyes narrowed. And yet my daughter, who hasn't spoken in 6 months, acts as if she's known you all her life. Paige swallowed hard. Mr. Drake, I've been honest with you about my background. I was found abandoned as a baby and raised by a woman named Eleanor Sullivan until I was 12. After she died, I was in foster care until I aged out of the system. I've been on my own since then. She hesitated, then added, I can't explain Charlotte's reaction to me. It's strange, I admit, but strange, Samuel repeated, turning away. Yes, that's one word for it. After a moment he spoke again, his voice softer. My wife used to sing to Charlotte at night, a lullaby her grandmother taught her last night. I heard you singing the same song. Paige felt a chill. I wasn't singing anything specific, just humming. It was the same melody, note for note. Samuel turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Perhaps you heard it somewhere before. Perhaps it's a coincidence, but in my experience, Miss Sullivan, coincidences rarely exist in such numbers. Before Paige could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Jenkins entered without waiting for an answer. Excuse me, sir. Dr. Montgomery is on the phone. He says it's about the matter you discussed. Samuel's jaw tightened. Tell him I'll call back in 5 minutes. After Mrs. Jenkins left, he turned back to Paige. That will be all for now. Please see that Charlotte is ready for her lesson. Dismissed, Paige hurried back to Charlotte's room, her mind spinning. What had Samuel meant about coincidences? And who was Dr. Montgomery? That night, after putting Charlotte to bed in her own room, Paige dreamed. She was walking through the Drake mansion, but it was different, brighter, filled with flowers and laughter. A woman sat in the garden, her back to Paige, blonde hair cascading down her back as she sang softly to herself. Paige tried to see her face, but every time she came close, the woman vanished, leaving only the echo of her song and the scent of jasmine. Paige woke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was dark except for a sliver of moonlight through the curtains, and there, silhouetted in the doorway, was a figure. Charlotte, Paige whispered, reaching for the lamp. But when the light came on, the doorway was empty. Had she imagined it? Shaken, Paige rose and checked the hallway. Nothing. She was about to return to bed when she noticed Charlotte's door was ajar. Peering inside, she found the child fast asleep, clutching a silver-framed photograph. Margaret Drake, smiling at the camera, a garden of roses behind her, as Paige gently removed the frame from Charlotte's grasp. She noticed something odd. In the background of the photo, partially obscured by roses, was another woman. Her face wasn't visible, but something about her stance, the tilt of her head, sent another chill through Paige. In the kitchen below, Mrs. Jenkins sat with the night guard, a cup of tea growing cold before her. I'm telling you, Frank, there's something not right about that girl. The way she moves, the way she talks to the child. It's just like how she used to be. And the master doesn't see it because he doesn't want to. Who doesn't he see? Frank asked, confused. Mrs. Jenkins' lips thinned to a line. The young woman who used to visit the mistress in secret, years ago. before little Charlotte was born, always coming when the master was away, always leaving before he returned. I never saw her face clearly, but the way she moved. The housekeeper shook her head. It's the same. I'd stake my life on it. Upstairs, Paige slipped back into her bed, unaware of the conversation below, or the secrets beginning to unravel around her. But as she drifted off to sleep, the melody from her dream returned, and with it, a sense that the Drake mansion was keeping secrets that were somehow intertwined with her own mysterious past. 3 weeks into Paige's employment at the Drake mansion, the staff had settled into a new rhythm. Charlotte was speaking more each day. Though primarily to Paige, she had begun eating regular meals and even ventured into the garden on sunny afternoons. Samuel, initially wary of Paige, had started joining them for dinner most evenings, watching with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion as his daughter slowly emerged from her shell. That morning, Paige and Charlotte sat in the garden, making daisy chains while a soft breeze carried the scent of roses around them. Charlotte's fingers worked deftly, an unexpected skill for a 5-year-old. "My mommy showed me how," she explained when Paige commented on her expertise. "She said her mommy showed her, and someday I'll show my little girl." Paige smiled, though a strange sensation tightened her chest at the child's words. "That's a beautiful tradition. Do you have a mommy?" Charlotte asked, looking up with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Paige hesitated. "I had someone who took care of me when I was little. Her name was Eleanor, but not a real mommy." "No, sweetie. I never knew my real mommy." Charlotte nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something she already knew. "That's why you're sad inside, like Daddy is sad outside." Before Paige could respond to this startling observation, the sound of tires on gravel drew their attention. A sleek black Mercedes was pulling up the driveway, unusual for mid-morning when Samuel was typically at his office in Savannah. "That's not Daddy's car," Charlotte said, her brow furrowing. Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the garden gate, her typically stern expression even more pronounced. "Miss Sullivan, we have a visitor, mister. Drake asks that you bring Charlotte to the main parlor." As they followed Mrs. Jenkins through the house, Paige felt a growing unease. Charlotte must have sensed it too, because she slipped her small hand into Paige's, holding tight. The main parlor, rarely used since Margaret's death, had been hastily opened. Sunlight filtered through the partially drawn curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Samuel stood near the fireplace, his posture rigid. Across from him sat a woman Paige had never seen before. She was in her early 60s, expensively dressed in a tailored navy suit, her silver-streaked hair swept into an elegant chignon. At their entrance, she turned, fixing Paige with a gaze so penetrating it felt almost physical. "Ah, here they are," Samuel said, his voice carefully neutral. "Charlotte, come say hello to your great-aunt Victoria." Charlotte pressed closer to Paige, half hiding behind her skirt. "I don't want to," she whispered. The woman, Victoria, rose smoothly, her red-painted lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Charlotte, darling, you've grown so much." Her gaze shifted to Paige, hardening. "And this must be the new nanny I've heard so much about." Something in her tone made Paige's skin crawl. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Paige Sullivan." Victoria Montgomery's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sullivan. Not a name I recognize from Savannah society." "Miss Sullivan isn't from Savannah," Samuel interjected. "Charlotte, please come greet your aunt properly." With obvious reluctance, Charlotte stepped forward, allowing Victoria to pat her head stiffly. "You look more like your mother every day," Victoria said, her voice softening momentarily. "Such a tragedy." Samuel cleared his throat. "Charlotte, why don't you ask Mrs. Jenkins to get you some lemonade while the adults talk?" Once Charlotte had been led away, the atmosphere in the room changed palpably. Victoria returned to her seat, gesturing for Paige to take the chair opposite. "So, Miss Sullivan," she said, her voice cool and measured, "my nephew tells me you've worked wonders with Charlotte. Quite remarkable for someone with no formal training or references." Paige felt Samuel watching her, gauging her reaction. "Charlotte is a special child," she said carefully. "We connected right away." "Yes, so I've heard." Victoria's gaze was calculating. "Tell me, where exactly are you from?" "South Carolina." "Originally, where in South Carolina?" Paige shifted uncomfortably. "A small town, You wouldn't know it. Try me. I have relatives throughout the Carolinas. Abbeville County, Paige said, naming the area where Eleanor had found her. Near the Georgia border. Victoria studied her for a long moment. Interesting, you don't have the accent. I've moved around a lot, Samuel interrupted, clearly sensing Paige's discomfort. Victoria is Margaret's aunt, Paige. She's visiting from Charleston for a few days. How convenient that I happen to be in Savannah for a charity gala, Victoria added smoothly. When I called Samuel this morning and heard about Charlotte's miraculous improvement, I simply had to meet the woman responsible. Her smile was sharp as a blade, especially when Samuel mentioned how remarkably familiar certain of your mannerisms seem. Paige felt a chill despite the warm room. I'm not sure what you mean. No. Victoria reached for her handbag. An expensive leather affair. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. She withdrew a small photograph, sliding it across the coffee table, with a sense of foreboding. Paige picked it up. It showed a younger Victoria standing beside another woman, Margaret Drake. Unmistakable from the portraits around the house, they were in what appeared to be a garden party setting. But what made Paige's breath catch was the third figure in the background, a young woman with her face partially turned away, her hand making a distinctive gesture as she tucked her hair behind her ear, exactly as Paige habitually did. Where did you get this? Samuel asked sharply, moving to look over Paige's shoulder. From my personal collection, Victoria replied. It was taken at the Montgomery Summer Estate about 7 years ago, before you and Margaret were married, Samuel. Her gaze returned to Paige, cold and assessing. The resemblance is quite striking, isn't it? Not in features, perhaps, but in movement, in gesture. Margaret had a very distinctive visitor during those summers. Paige stared at the photo, a strange buzzing in her ears. The woman's face was obscured, but something about her posture, the tilt of her head. I've never been to the Montgomery estate, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never met Mrs. Drake. Haven't you? Victoria's voice dripped with disbelief. Then how do you explain Charlotte's reaction to you? The way you know exactly how to comfort her, how to speak to her, the way you hum Margaret's lullaby without ever having heard it. Samuel took the photo from Paige's trembling hands. That's enough, Victoria. Paige has been nothing but good for Charlotte. Has she? Victoria stood, gathering her things. Or is she playing some game we don't yet understand? She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Paige. I'll be at the Riverfront Hotel until Sunday, perhaps by then. Miss Sullivan, you'll be ready to tell us who you really are and why you've come to the Drake mansion. After she'd gone, a heavy silence fell over the room. Samuel stood at the window, the photograph still in his hand. Mr. Drake, Paige began. I swear to you, I've never... I need to make some calls, he interrupted, not looking at her. Please check on Charlotte. We'll discuss this later. Left alone in the parlor, Paige struggled to make sense of what had just happened. The woman in the photograph couldn't be her. She would have been barely 18 7 years ago, living in a group home in Columbia. Yet the sense of recognition, the way her heart had jolted at the sight. As she walked toward the kitchen to find Charlotte, Paige passed the portrait of Margaret Drake that hung in the main hallway. For the first time, she stopped and really looked at it, searching the beautiful face for answers. What did you know? She whispered to the painted eyes that seemed to follow her. And what does it have to do with me? Dark clouds gathered over the Drake mansion that evening, mirroring the tension that had settled inside. After Victoria Montgomery's unexpected visit, Samuel had sequestered himself in his study, making phone calls behind closed doors. Paige had spent the afternoon distracting Charlotte with board games and stories, trying to maintain normalcy while her own thoughts swirled with questions as they finished dinner, a quiet affair with Samuel noticeably absent. Paige noticed Charlotte watching the windows anxiously. What's wrong, sweetie? She asked, helping the child down from her chair. It's going to storm, Charlotte whispered, the big kind that makes the house talk. As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance. Charlotte flinched, grabbing Paige's hand. I need to sleep in your room tonight, she insisted. The shadows come with the storms. Mrs. Jenkins, clearing the dishes, gave a disapproving sniff. Miss Charlotte has a perfectly good room of her own, with night lights and everything her father has provided. Paige ignored the housekeeper's pointed comment. Let's get you bathed and in pajamas first. Then we'll see what your father says." By the time Charlotte was clean and dressed in her nightgown, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the old oaks surrounding the property. Samuel still hadn't emerged from his study, so Paige made the executive decision to let Charlotte stay with her, at least until the storm passed. "Tell me a story," Charlotte demanded as they settled onto Paige's bed, the little girl clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "What kind of story?" "About the princess who lived in a tower and had to give away her baby." Paige frowned. "I don't know that one, Charlotte. Mommy used to tell it, about a princess who loved a knight. But the king said no, so she had to hide her baby in the forest." Charlotte's eyes were solemn in the lamplight. "The princess cried every day, but she couldn't find her baby ever again." A shiver ran down Paige's spine. "That's a sad story." Charlotte nodded. "Mommy always cried when she told it. She said someday it would have a happy ending, but then she went to sleep in the ground before Paige could respond. A particularly violent gust of wind shook the house, followed by a tremendous crash from somewhere above them. Charlotte screamed, burrowing against Paige. "It's okay," Paige soothed, though her own heart was racing. Probably just a branch hitting the roof. Footsteps pounded in the hallway, and Samuel appeared at the door, his expression tense. "Are you all right?" That sounded like it came from the attic. "We're fine," Paige assured him. "Just startled." He nodded, his gaze lingering on Charlotte, who remained firmly attached to Paige's side. "I need to check the damage. Stay here." "I'll come with you," Paige decided, gently detaching Charlotte. "Sweetie, you stay here where it's safe. We'll be right back." Charlotte reluctantly agreed, building herself a nest of pillows on Paige's bed, while the adults headed upstairs. The attic stairs creaked ominously as they climbed. Samuel led the way with a flashlight, the beam dancing over dusty furniture and stacked boxes. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten things. "There," Samuel pointed to where a section of the roof had partially collapsed, allowing rain to pour in onto the attic floor. Beneath the hole, an old trunk had been soaked, its contents spilling out onto the floorboards. "We need to move these things before they're ruined," Samuel said. Already kneeling beside the trunk, Paige joined him, gathering sodden papers and photographs as she worked. Something caught her eye. A small leather-bound book, its pages damp but largely intact. The name, Margaret, was embossed in faded gold on the cover. "Mr. Drake," she said quietly, holding it up. "I think this is your wife's diary." Samuel stared at the book, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. With hands that trembled slightly, he took it from her. "I didn't know she kept one," he murmured, turning it over reverently. "At least, not after we were married." A folded paper slipped from between the pages. Landing at Paige's feet, she picked it up and carefully unfolded it. A photograph, water-stained but recognizable. A much younger Margaret Drake stood with another young woman, their arms around each other, both smiling broadly at the camera. Paige's breath caught. The other woman's face was partially obscured by water damage, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her. "Who is this with your wife?" she asked, passing the photo to Samuel. He frowned, studying it. "I don't know. I never saw this before." He glanced back at the diary in his hands, then at Paige. After a moment's hesitation, he tucked both the diary and the photo into his jacket. "We should finish securing these things, then get back to Charlotte." They worked in silence for the next 20 minutes, moving what could be saved and covering the hole in the roof with a tarp Samuel found among the stored items. All the while, Paige could feel the weight of unasked questions between them. When they returned to her room, they found Charlotte fast asleep, clutching her rabbit. Samuel watched his daughter for a long moment, his expression softening. "She trusts you," he said quietly. "She hasn't trusted anyone since Margaret died." Paige nodded, unsure how to respond. "Victoria is wrong about you," he continued, surprising her. "I've been making calls, checking your background. You were in Colombia when that photo was taken. You couldn't have been at the Montgomery estate." Relief washed over Paige. "Thank you for believing me." Samuel reached into his jacket and withdrew the diary. "I want you to have this." "Me? But it's your wife's. And for some reason, my daughter believes you're connected to her mother." Maybe there's something in here that explains why. His eyes met hers, intense and searching. I've spent 6 months mourning my wife, Miss Sullivan. I'm not ready to read her private thoughts, but I need to understand what's happening here. Why Charlotte responded to you. Why Victoria thinks she recognizes you. Paige took the diary with trembling hands. What if it contains personal things? Things meant only for you. Then you'll return it, and we'll never speak of it again. He glanced at Charlotte's sleeping form. But if there's anything that explains this connection, I need to know. After Samuel left, Paige sat on the window seat, listening to the storm gradually subside outside. The diary felt heavy in her hands, a weight beyond its physical presence. Opening it seemed like a violation, yet not opening it felt like turning away from answers she desperately needed. Finally, as the clock downstairs chimed midnight, she carefully opened the leather cover. The first page bore a date from 7 years ago, before Margaret's marriage to Samuel. The handwriting was elegant, but rushed, as if the writer had been emotional. I saw her again today, the entry began. My first flower, growing wild and beautiful without me. I stood so close enough to reach out and touch her, but I remained hidden. What right do I have to disrupt her life now? After all these years, better she never knows the truth of her birth, the terrible choice her mother made. Better she lives free of the burden I carry every day, knowing I gave away my own child. Paige's hands began to shake so badly that the diary slipped from her grasp, landing with a soft thud on the carpeted floor. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, expectant silence, as if the house itself were holding its breath. In her sleep, Charlotte murmured something that sounded like Margaret, and turned over, her small face peaceful in the dim light. Paige stared at the fallen diary, her mind racing with possibilities too enormous, too life-altering to fully comprehend. The mysterious woman visiting Margaret Drake in secret, the strange connection Charlotte felt to her, the way she'd known the lullaby without ever hearing it. Could it be possible? Could she, Paige Sullivan, abandoned as an infant, raised by strangers, perpetually searching for a place to belong, be connected to this family in ways she'd never imagined? With a shaking hand, she reached down and picked up the diary, turning to the next page, desperate for answers yet terrified of what she might find. Dawn broke over the Drake mansion, painting the sky in shades of amber and lavender. Paige hadn't slept. After reading several entries in Margaret's diary, she'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions and possibilities too enormous to fully grasp. Charlotte had returned to her own room after breakfast, eager to show Paige a collection of seashells her mother had gathered. The moment alone gave Paige a chance to slip the diary into her pocket before heading downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Jenkins kneading dough with unusual force, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Good morning?" Paige ventured. The housekeeper merely nodded, her hands never pausing their rhythmic work. After an awkward silence, Paige poured herself a cup of coffee. "Mr. Drake has received a letter?" Mrs. Jenkins said suddenly, her voice pitched low. "Came this morning, special delivery." Something in the older woman's tone made Paige pause. "What kind of letter?" Mrs. Jenkins glanced toward the door before continuing. "The kind with no return address. The kind that made him lock himself in his study and start making phone calls?" Her sharp eyes fixed on Paige. "The kind that came right after you showed up here. Are you suggesting I had something to do with it?" "I'm not suggesting anything." Mrs. Jenkins wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. "But strange things started happening the moment you walked through that door, Miss Sullivan." Charlotte speaking again. "The master finding old things in the attic. And now this letter." She leaned closer. "I've served this family for 23 years. I was here when the mistress came as a bride, when Charlotte was born, when the ambulance took Mrs. Drake away that night. And I'm telling you, there's something not right about all this." Before Paige could respond, Samuel appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with tension. "Paige, I need to speak with you. In my study now." She followed him through the house, a knot forming in her stomach. His study door was firmly shut behind them before he spoke again. "I received this today." He held up an envelope, the paper expensive and cream-colored. "There's no signature, but the message is clear enough." Paige took the letter with trembling fingers. The typed message was short and ominous. "Dismiss the Sullivan girl immediately, Or certain truths about Margaret's past will become public knowledge. Some secrets should remain buried with the dead. I don't understand, Paige said, looking up at Samuel. What truths? What secrets? Samuel ran a hand through his hair. A gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. I don't know. Margaret and I had a good marriage. At least, I thought we did. He sank into his chair. But lately, I'm beginning to wonder how much I really knew about her. Paige thought of the diary entries she'd read last night, of the first flower Margaret had written about with such longing and regret. She touched the small bulge in her pocket where the diary rested. Mr. Drake, Samuel, he interrupted. I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you? Samuel? She amended, the name feeling strange on her tongue. I need to show you something. Reluctantly, she withdrew the diary. I've read some of it. Not all, but enough to... She hesitated, unsure how to continue. To what? He prompted, his eyes fixed on the small leather-bound book. Paige took a deep breath. Your wife had a secret. Something from before she met you. She opened the diary to the page she'd marked. Here, it's better if you read it yourself. Samuel took the diary with visible reluctance, his eyes scanning the page she indicated. As he read, his face went through a rapid succession of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, shock. This can't be right, he murmured, turning the page, then another. Margaret would have told me if she'd had a... He couldn't finish the sentence, his voice catching. A child, Paige said softly. Before she met you. Samuel looked up, his eyes haunted. Who else knows about this? Based on that letter, someone who wants me gone. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Jenkins entered without waiting for a response, her face pale. Sir, Dr. Montgomery is here. Says it's urgent. Samuel quickly tucked the diary into his desk drawer. Show him in. Dr. Thomas Montgomery was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He embraced Samuel warmly before turning to Paige with obvious curiosity. So, this is the young woman Victoria mentioned, he said, studying her with an intensity that made Paige uncomfortable. Remarkable. Thomas, what brings you here? Samuel asked, gesturing for the doctor to sit. Victoria called me last night, quite agitated. Dr. Montgomery settled into a chair, still watching Paige. She said things were happening at the Drake house that concerned her. Something about the past resurfacing. He glanced at Samuel. She thinks Miss Sullivan here is... well, it's rather complicated. Spit it out, Thomas, Samuel said impatiently. After 20 years of friendship, I think we're beyond delicacy. The doctor sighed. Victoria believes Miss Sullivan might be connected to Margaret's past. A past even you don't know about, Samuel. Paige felt the room tilt slightly. Dr. Montgomery, did you know Margaret Drake well? I was her family physician since childhood, and a friend to her parents before their passing. His expression softened. Margaret was like a niece to me. Did you know she had a child? Before Charlotte. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dr. Montgomery's face drained of color. How could you possibly... he began, then stopped, his eyes widening as he truly looked at Paige for the first time. Good God! Samuel leaned forward. Thomas, what is it? The doctor seemed unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he cleared his throat. Margaret was very young. Barely 18, the father was. Not a suitable match, according to her family. When her condition became apparent, she was sent away to a private facility in the mountains. The child was to be given up for adoption. But that didn't happen, did it? Paige asked quietly. Dr. Montgomery shook his head. There were complications. The baby was born early, weak. Margaret was devastated, convinced the child wouldn't survive. By the time she recovered enough to inquire, she was told the baby had died. His gaze shifted back to Paige. But I always had my doubts. The records were too neat, the explanations too convenient. Victoria handled the arrangements, you see, and Victoria has always been pragmatic about the family reputation. You think she lied? Samuel's voice was tight with anger. That she told Margaret her baby died when it hadn't. I think it's possible, Dr. Montgomery admitted. Victoria would have considered it a kindness, in her way. Better Margaret believe the child dead than spend her life searching. Paige reached into her pocket, withdrawing a small, tarnished object she'd carried for as long as she could remember, half of a silver bracelet, broken at the clasp, with the name Margaret engraved on the inside. I was found abandoned on a roadside in South Carolina, just over the Georgia border, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No identification, except for this bracelet. She placed it on the desk. The woman who found me, who raised me until I was 12, she said I was clutching it so tightly they couldn't pry it from my hand. Dr. Montgomery stared at the bracelet, his face ashen. Margaret wore one just like it, a gift from her grandmother. He looked up at Paige, his eyes filling with tears. She wore it until the day Victoria took her away to have the baby. I never saw it again. Samuel rose abruptly, moving to the window, his back to them. He asked, "Are you saying that Paige is Margaret's daughter? That my wife had a child she thought had died? And now that child is sitting in my study? I'm saying it's possible." Dr. Montgomery replied quietly, "Very possible." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Paige felt as if she were floating outside her body, watching this scene unfold from a distance. All her life, she'd wondered about her origins, dreamed of finding a family that was truly hers. Now, faced with the possibility, she felt numb with shock. "This is why Victoria is so determined to have you leave," Dr. Montgomery continued, addressing Paige. "If what we're suggesting is true, your presence here threatens everything she's built, the Montgomery family reputation, the carefully constructed narrative of Margaret's life, and the letter." Samuel turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "Who would send that?" "Victoria, almost certainly," the doctor replied. "She's always been willing to do whatever necessary to protect the family name." Paige's mind was still reeling with implications. "If Margaret Drake was my mother, then Charlotte is your half-sister," Samuel finished, his eyes meeting hers across the room. The days following Dr. Montgomery's revelation passed in a blur for Paige. She continued her duties as Charlotte's nanny, but beneath the surface of normalcy, everything had changed. Each time she looked at the child, she no longer saw just her charge, but possibly her half-sister, a connection that explained the inexplicable bond they'd shared from the first moment. Samuel had grown distant, spending long hours at his office in town or locked in his study when at home. Paige couldn't blame him. Discovering that his late wife had kept such a monumental secret must have shaken the foundation of everything he believed about their marriage one afternoon as Charlotte napped. Paige sat in the garden with Margaret's diary, reading further entries. Most were mundane reflections on daily life, but occasionally, heart-wrenching passages appeared about the child she'd lost, or believed she had lost. "I dreamed of her again last night." One entry read, "She would be 7 now. Would she have my eyes? Would she love books as I do? The pain never lessens, only changes shape. Some days I can almost forget, but then I see a little girl Charlotte's age, and it all comes flooding back. The weight of her in my arms for those brief moments before they took her away." Paige wiped away tears, closing the diary as she heard footsteps approaching. Samuel stood on the garden path, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Charlotte's still sleeping?" he asked. Paige nodded. "She had trouble falling asleep last night, bad dreams." Samuel sat on the bench beside her, maintaining a careful distance. For a while, they sat in silence, the late summer breeze stirring the roses that surrounded them. "I've been avoiding you," he said finally. "I know, not because of what we discovered." He hesitated, searching for words. "But because every time I look at you now, I see pieces of her. The way you tilt your head when you're listening. The way your hands move when you're explaining something to Charlotte." He swallowed hard. "It's like seeing ghosts." Paige looked down at the closed diary in her lap. "I never knew her. If she really was my mother, I never got the chance to know her." "But she knew you," Samuel said softly. "At least, she tried to, those summers at the Montgomery estate. She must have arranged to see you somehow. Victoria would know," Paige suggested. "If she was the one who handled the arrangements after my birth." Samuel's expression hardened. "Victoria hasn't returned my calls. Thomas says she's left Savannah, gone back to Charleston. Running away," Paige murmured. "Perhaps." Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew something that glinted in the sunlight, a silver bracelet identical to the broken one Paige had kept all these years. I found this among Margaret's things. I never knew its significance before. Paige stared at it, her heart pounding. That's the other half of yours, I think. He held it out to her. I've been carrying it around for days, trying to decide what to do, about you, about all of this. With trembling fingers, Paige took the bracelet, holding it alongside her broken piece. The two halves matched perfectly, the clasp of one fitting the broken link of the other. They can be repaired, Samuel said, watching her examine the pieces. Made whole again. The metaphor wasn't lost on Paige. Is that what you want? To make things whole? Before Samuel could answer, Charlotte's voice called from the house. Miss Paige, where are you? In the garden, sweetie, Paige called back, quickly tucking both bracelet halves into her pocket. Charlotte appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her favorite stuffed rabbit dragging behind her. She climbed onto the bench between them, instinctively leaning against Paige. I had the dream again, she said, her voice small, about the lady in the water. Samuel tensed visibly. They'd never discussed Margaret's accident in front of Charlotte, had never told her that her mother had drowned. How could the child know? What lady, Charlotte? Paige asked gently. The one who looks like you. She's underwater, and she's trying to tell me something, but the bubbles take her words away. Charlotte looked up at Paige with solemn eyes. She wants you to find something. Samuel and Paige exchanged a glance over the child's head. What does she want me to find? Paige asked. Charlotte shrugged. She just says, find it over and over, and then I wake up. After putting Charlotte down for the night, Paige found Samuel waiting in the hallway outside her bedroom. His face was grim. We need to talk, he said, gesturing for her to follow him. In his study, he closed the door before turning to face her. I received another letter today. He handed her an envelope identical to the first. Paige opened it with dread. You were warned. Since you have chosen to keep the Sullivan girl, you leave no choice. The truth about your wife's disgrace and her illegitimate child will be delivered to the Savannah Morning News tomorrow. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. They're going to expose everything, Paige whispered. So it seems. Samuel poured himself a drink, his movements stiff with tension. The question is, what do we do about it? I could leave, Paige suggested, though the thought of never seeing Charlotte again made her chest ache. If I'm gone, maybe they'll... No. Samuel's response was immediate and firm. Running away solves nothing. Besides, Charlotte would be devastated. He took a long swallow of his drink. And so would I. The unexpected admission hung in the air between them. Samuel, You belong here, he interrupted. I've been fighting it since you arrived. This sense that you were meant to be part of our lives. I thought it was just Charlotte's attachment to you, or some trick of memory because of your similarities to Margaret. But it's more than that. He set down his glass. You're her daughter, Charlotte's sister. Your family, tears welled in Paige's eyes. But the scandal, let them publish what they want, Samuel said with sudden resolve. The Drakes have weathered worse. What matters is that Charlotte is happy again, and if there's even a chance that you are Margaret's daughter, then you deserve to know your history, your family. He paused. But there is one way to be certain. DNA testing, Paige said, having already considered this. But we'd need Margaret's DNA to compare against mine. Not necessarily. Samuel's expression softened slightly. We have Charlotte. If you're Margaret's daughter, you and Charlotte would share maternal DNA. The possibility of definitive proof made Paige's heart race. How soon could we know? I've already spoken to Thomas. He can arrange for private testing, discreet and expedited. We could have results in a few days. Paige fingered the broken bracelet pieces in her pocket, these tangible links to a past she'd never known. And if the results confirm it, what then? Samuel crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the flecks of gray at his temples. Then we face whatever comes together. As a family. The word family echoed in Paige's mind as she returned to her room that night. She'd spent her entire life searching for belonging, for connections that ran deeper than circumstance. Now, on the verge of discovering her true origins, she felt both terrified and exhilarated. She took out both halves of the bracelet, laying them side by side on her bedside table. In the moonlight streaming through her window, the name Margaret gleamed softly, a beacon from the past. "Were you my mother?" Paige whispered to the empty room. "Did you look for me all those years? Did you ever know I was alive?" Only silence answered her questions. But somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. A new chapter in a story that had begun 25 years ago with a young woman, a forbidden love, and a child taken too soon. The next morning dawned with an unusual chill for late summer in Georgia. Paige woke early, the combined bracelet halves still on her nightstand where she'd left them. She'd spent hours trying to join them together, but without the proper tools, they remained separate. Much like the pieces of her identity she was still struggling to connect. She dressed quickly and headed downstairs, surprised to find Samuel already in the kitchen, making coffee. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. "Morning," he said, sliding a mug toward her. "Charlotte's still asleep. Did you hear anything from Dr. Montgomery?" "About the tests." Samuel nodded. "He's coming by this afternoon. Said he has everything arranged." He hesitated, then added, "The Savannah Morning News called my office an hour ago. They wanted a comment on a developing story regarding the Drake family." Paige's stomach dropped. The threat was real. Apparently, Samuel's jaw tightened. "I told my assistant to direct all media inquiries to our family attorney. Whatever storm is coming, we'll weather it." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Jenkins, who entered the kitchen with an expression even more severe than usual. "There's a woman at the front door," she announced. "Says she's from social services. Something about Charlotte's welfare." Samuel's face darkened. "Tell her I'll be right there." After Mrs. Jenkins left, he turned to Paige. "Stay with Charlotte. Don't leave her side for a moment." In the grand foyer, Samuel found a middle-aged woman in a severe gray suit, a leather portfolio clutched in her hands. "Mr. Drake, I'm Helen Prescott, from Child Protective Services." Her voice was brisk and official. "We've received a concerning report regarding your daughter's care." Samuel maintained his composure with effort. "What kind of report?" "An anonymous caller suggested you've hired an unstable individual as your daughter's nanny, someone with a questionable background who may pose a risk to the child." She consulted her notes. "A Paige Sullivan. Miss Sullivan is a valued employee and has been nothing but beneficial to my daughter's well-being," Samuel replied coldly. "Charlotte has made remarkable progress under her care." Mrs. Prescott's expression remained impassive. "Nevertheless, I need to conduct an assessment. May I speak with Miss Sullivan and your daughter? My daughter is still asleep, and I'll need to see proper documentation before allowing any interviews." Samuel's tone brooked no argument. "And I'll have my attorney present." Just then, the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Jenkins, who had been hovering nearby, moved to answer it. "Samuel, are you home?" Dr. Montgomery's familiar voice called from the entrance. "I came as soon as I could. Victoria's been making calls all morning. She's determined to—" He stopped abruptly upon seeing the social worker. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Samuel seized the opportunity. "Ms. Prescott, this is Dr. Thomas Montgomery, our family physician. He's been treating Charlotte since birth and can attest to her excellent care." Dr. Montgomery, quickly grasping the situation, stepped forward. "Indeed, I was just here last week for Charlotte's checkup. She's thriving, especially in recent months." He turned to Samuel. "May I speak with you privately? It's rather urgent." Samuel excused them, directing Mrs. Jenkins to show Miss Prescott to the parlor and offer refreshments. Instructions designed to buy time. In his study, he closed the door firmly before turning to the doctor. "Victoria is behind this, isn't she?" Dr. Montgomery nodded grimly. "She's scorching the earth, Samuel. The social services call is just the beginning. She's contacted the hospital board, threatening to withdraw the Montgomery family donations if I proceed with the DNA testing. She's even hiring private investigators to dig into Paige's past." "Why?" Samuel demanded. "What is she so afraid of?" The doctor sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "It's time I told you everything. The full truth about Margaret, about her first child, about Victoria's role in it all." Upstairs, Paige sat beside Charlotte's bed, watching the child sleep peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding below. A soft knock at the door revealed Mrs. Jenkins. "Mr. Drake asks that you join him in his study," she said. her expression giving nothing away. "I'll stay with Miss Charlotte." In the study, Paige found Samuel and Dr. Montgomery in what appeared to be an intense conversation that halted abruptly when she entered. "Paige," Samuel said, his voice strained. "Thomas has something to tell us both." Dr. Montgomery stood, his shoulders hunched with what looked like the weight of decades of secrets. "Miss Sullivan, Paige, what I'm about to share should have been revealed long ago. I've been a coward, and for that, I can only ask your forgiveness." He withdrew an old photograph from his wallet. It showed a young woman, barely out of her teens, holding a newborn baby. Even in the faded image, the woman's resemblance to the portraits of Margaret Drake throughout the house was unmistakable. "This was taken the day after you were born," he said, passing the photo to Paige. "Margaret refused to give you up without at least one picture to remember you by. The official story was that you died shortly after this was taken. Victoria arranged the paperwork, paid off the right people." Paige stared at the photograph, her vision blurring with tears. "She knew I was alive." "No," Dr. Montgomery said firmly. "Margaret truly believed you had died. Victoria told her there had been complications, that you hadn't survived the night." He paused, his voice breaking. What she didn't know, what none of us knew at the time, was that Victoria had other plans. She couldn't risk an ordinary adoption where Margaret might someday track you down. So she arranged for you to be taken across state lines and abandoned. The room seemed to tilt beneath Paige's feet. Samuel moved to her side, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "Victoria did this?" Samuel asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "She deliberately had an infant abandoned on a roadside. She paid someone to deliver the baby to a church." Montgomery clarified, though the distinction offered little comfort. But apparently, the person she hired had their own agenda. They took Victoria's money and then simply left the child where she would be found, but without any traceable connection to the Montgomery family. Paige found her voice at last. "The bracelet, if they wanted to erase all connections. Why was I found with Margaret's bracelet?" Dr. Montgomery shook his head. "That, I don't know. Perhaps whoever Victoria hired had a moment of conscience, or perhaps..." He hesitated, then continued. "Perhaps Margaret herself found a way to give it to you. Though, how she could have managed that, I can't imagine." The sound of running footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the door, panic etched on her normally composed features. "She's gone," the housekeeper exclaimed. "I only stepped out for a moment to use the bathroom, and when I came back, Charlotte's bed was empty. I've checked the entire upstairs. She's nowhere to be found." Samuel was on his feet instantly. "Check the grounds, every room, every closet, every hiding place she knows." As they rushed to begin the search, the doorbell rang yet again, through the study window. Paige caught sight of Victoria Montgomery's sleek black Mercedes in the driveway. "It's her," she said, her voice hollow with shock and newly awakened rage. "The woman who threw me away like garbage and told my mother I was dead. She's here." Samuel caught her arm as she moved toward the door. "Paige, wait. Charlotte is our priority right now. Victoria can wait." But as they reached the foyer, they found Mrs. Jenkins already admitting Victoria, whose triumphant expression faltered at the sight of their obvious distress. "What's happened?" she demanded. "Charlotte's missing," Samuel said curtly. "If you'll excuse us, we need to find my daughter." Victoria's face paled. "Missing? How? When?" Dr. Montgomery approached his sister, his expression harder than Paige had ever seen it. "What have you done, Victoria? First the letters, then social services, and now this. How far are you willing to go to protect your precious family reputation?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Victoria replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "I came to speak with Samuel about an important family matter. The most important family matter right now is finding Charlotte," Samuel interrupted. "Thomas, check the East Wing, Paige, the gardens, Mrs. Jenkins, the West Wing. I'll search the outbuildings." As they dispersed, Paige heard Victoria call after her. "She's using you, you know. Using you to worm her way into this family, this fortune, just like her father tried to use Margaret all those years ago." Paige froze, turning slowly. "What do you know about my father?" Victoria's smile was cold. "Everything, my dear. Absolutely everything." The sky darkened ominously as Paige raced through the gardens, calling Charlotte's name. Rain began to fall, first as a gentle mist, then in heavy sheets that soaked through her clothes. Thunder rumbled in the distance, each crash sending a fresh wave of panic through her. "Charlotte!" she shouted, her voice nearly lost in the downpour. "Charlotte, where are you?" The expansive grounds of the Drake estate seemed endless in her desperation. She checked the rose garden, the old gazebo, the small pond where Charlotte sometimes fed the ducks. Nothing, as she rounded the corner toward the old oak tree with its swing. A flash of lightning illuminated a small figure huddled beneath its branches. "Charlotte," Paige ran forward, relief flooding through her. "What are you doing out here? Everyone's looking for you." The child looked up, her face streaked with tears and rain. "She's a bad lady," Charlotte said, her voice trembling. "The one who came today, she hurt Mommy." Paige knelt beside her, pushing wet hair from the girl's face. "How do you know that, sweetie?" "I heard her talking to Mrs. Jenkins last time she visited. She said Mommy was going to tell secrets, so she had to stop her." Charlotte's blue eyes were wide with fear. "She made Mommy's car crash." A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran down Paige's spine. Could Victoria have been responsible for Margaret's death? The accusation seemed incredible, yet given what they'd learned about Victoria's actions in the past. "We need to get you inside," Paige said. "Paige," pushing the disturbing thought aside for the moment. "You'll catch cold out here." Charlotte clung to her as they made their way back to the house, the rain coming down in blinding sheets now. By the time they reached the terrace, Samuel was rushing out to meet them. "Thank God," he breathed, gathering Charlotte into his arms. "Where was she?" "Under the oak tree," Paige replied, water dripping from her sodden clothes. "Samuel, she said something about Victoria." "Later," he interrupted, ushering them inside. "Let's get you both dry first." In the foyer, they found Dr. Montgomery pacing anxiously. Mrs. Jenkins quickly appeared with towels, whisking Charlotte away to change. Victoria was nowhere to be seen. "Where is she?" Paige asked, accepting a towel from Dr. Montgomery. "In the parlor," he replied grimly. "She's refusing to leave until she speaks with Samuel." Samuel handed his daughter to Mrs. Jenkins with instructions to give her a warm bath and keep her upstairs. Once Charlotte was safely out of earshot, his expression hardened. "Then let's hear what she has to say." Victoria sat primly on the edge of a wingback chair, looking oddly composed amidst the chaos. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Paige, still dripping rainwater onto the polished floor. "I'd prefer to speak with Samuel alone," she said coldly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of all of us," Samuel replied, his tone brooking no argument. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths to drive Paige away, Victoria. Now I want to know why." Victoria's lips thinned to a tight line. "Very well, since you insist on making this difficult." She turned to Paige. "I know who you are. More importantly, I know who your father was." Paige's heart pounded in her chest. "Who?" "Alexander Crawford." Victoria pronounced the name with obvious distaste. "A charming predator who seduced my niece when she was barely 18 and he was 35. A married man with political ambitions who saw the Montgomery fortune as his ticket to power." Dr. Montgomery made a small sound of surprise. "Alex Crawford, but that can't be right. Margaret never mentioned." "Of course she didn't," Victoria snapped. "She was infatuated. Thought they were in love. By the time she realized he was only using her, she was already pregnant." She fixed her cold gaze on Paige. "He wanted her to get rid of the child. When she refused, he threatened to ruin her if she ever revealed he was the father." Samuel stepped forward. "Even if this is true, what does it have to do with what you've done? The letters, the social services call, Charlotte's disappearance." "I had nothing to do with Charlotte going missing," Victoria protested. "But yes, I sent the letters. I hoped to scare you into sending this girl away before she could disrupt everything I've built." "You mean before the truth came out, Doctor?" Montgomery said sadly. "Before we all learned what you did 25 years ago, and what you may have done 6 months ago." Victoria's face paled. "What are you implying, Thomas?" Charlotte's small voice came from the doorway, where she stood in her bathrobe, having escaped Mrs. Jenkins. "You made Mommy's car crash. I heard you tell Mrs. Jenkins you had to stop her." A heavy silence fell over the room. Victoria stared at the child, her composure cracking for the first time. "That's absurd," she finally said. "The child is confused. Margaret's death was a tragic accident." "Was it?" Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. "What was Margaret going to tell me, Victoria? What secret was worth killing for?" Victoria stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. I've spent my life protecting this family, and this is how you repay me, with wild accusations from a child." Dr. Montgomery moved to stand beside Samuel. "Margaret called me the day before she died. She was agitated. Said she'd discovered something in Victoria's private files. Proof that her first child hadn't died as we'd been told. She was planning to tell you everything, Samuel. And then she conveniently drove off a bridge," Samuel said, the pieces falling into place. "On a road she'd driven hundreds of times. In weather that wasn't nearly as bad as the police report made it sound." Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her purse. "I won't stand here and listen to these vile accusations, Thomas. We're leaving." "No, Victoria. I'm not going anywhere with you." Dr. Montgomery's voice was firm. "I've been complicit in your lies for too long, no more. Then you'll regret it." Victoria's eyes were like ice as she swept her gaze across the room. "All of you will regret this day." She fixed her stare on Paige. "Especially you. You think finding your mother's family is a fairy tale ending? Wait until the world learns who your father really was. The scandal will destroy what's left of Margaret's reputation and tear this family apart." As Victoria stormed toward the door, Samuel called after her. "The police will be very interested in reviewing Margaret's accident, Victoria. I suggest you don't leave town." After she'd gone, the four of them stood in stunned silence, the only sound the steady drumming of rain against the windows. Charlotte moved to Paige's side, slipping her small hand into her nanny's. "Is she going to hurt us now?" the child asked. Paige knelt down, looking into eyes so like her own. "No, sweetie, we won't let her hurt anyone ever again." Montgomery cleared his throat. "Samuel, I think it's time we do those tests we discussed. The sooner we have proof of Paige's identity, the stronger our position will be." Samuel nodded, his gaze fixed on Charlotte and Paige, the two daughters of Margaret Drake, one he'd raised as his own, the other he'd only just discovered. "And we should contact the police," he said, "if Victoria was involved in Margaret's death." The sentence hung unfinished in the air, too terrible to complete. That night, after Charlotte had finally fallen asleep, Paige sat at her window, watching the storm gradually subside. The revelations of the day swirled in her mind. Her father, a manipulative politician who'd abandoned her mother, Victoria's possible involvement in Margaret's death, the web of lies that had kept her from her true family for 25 years. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that she belonged here, in this house, with Charlotte and Samuel, that somehow, against all odds, Margaret had found a way to bring her home. A soft knock at her door broke her reverie. Samuel entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I found this in Margaret's personal items," he said, setting it beside her. "I think you should have it." Inside lay a silver-framed photograph of a much younger Margaret, cradling a newborn wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. On the back, written in elegant script, "My first flower, born too soon. May you someday find your way back to me." Paige traced the words with trembling fingers, tears spilling down her cheeks. After all these years of searching, of wondering, she'd finally found her beginning. And tomorrow, with the DNA test Dr. Montgomery had arranged, she would find her truth. 1 week after Victoria's dramatic confrontation, Paige stood on the front porch of the Drake mansion, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sweltering Georgia summer had given way to the first hints of autumn, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the ancient oaks that lined the driveway. In her hand, she held an envelope, crisp, white, official. Inside were the DNA test results that would either confirm or deny what she'd already come to believe in her heart, that she was Margaret Drake's daughter, Charlotte's half-sister, a member of the family she'd found by what seemed like chance, but now felt like destiny. "You've been out here a while." Samuel's voice startled her. He joined her at the railing, coffee mug in hand, his eyes on the envelope she clutched. "I'm afraid to open it," Paige admitted. "Paige, what if it says I'm not? Does it matter at this point?" Samuel asked quietly. "DNA or not, you've become part of this family. Charlotte adores you, and I..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I can't imagine the house without you now." Paige looked down at the envelope. It matters. Not for Charlotte or for you, but for me. I've spent my whole life wondering where I came from, who I belong to. Samuel nodded, understanding. Then let's find out. With trembling fingers, Paige opened the envelope and unfolded the clinical-looking document inside. The medical terminology and percentages swam before her eyes. But one sentence stood out in stark clarity. The probability of matrilineal relationship between subject A, Charlotte Drake, and subject B, Paige Sullivan, is 99,997%, confirming half-sibling status through maternal DNA. It's true, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. I'm Margaret's daughter. Samuel's hand found hers. Warm and steady. Welcome home, Paige. The moment was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Dr. Montgomery's sedan appeared at the end of the driveway, moving faster than usual. He barely waited for the car to stop before emerging, his face grave. Samuel, Paige, we have a problem. Victoria's gone. Gone where? Samuel asked, his grip on Paige's hand tightening. Charleston, supposedly, but she's not at her house. Her assistant says she cleared her schedule for the next month. Dr. Montgomery looked worried. And the police called me this morning. They've reopened the investigation into Margaret's accident, but the forensics expert who was supposed to re-examine the car reported it missing from the impound lot. A cold dread settled in Paige's stomach. She's destroying evidence. That's not all, Dr. Montgomery continued. I've heard from colleagues at the hospital that Victoria's been making inquiries about Charlotte's birth records, looking for documentation of Margaret's previous pregnancy. She's systematically erasing every connection between Paige and the Montgomery family. Samuel's expression hardened. She can't erase DNA. No, but she can create doubt, scandal, confusion. Dr. Montgomery sighed heavily. My sister has spent decades building the Montgomery reputation. She won't surrender it without a fight. Inside the house, the phone rang. Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the door moments later, her face ashen. Sir, it's the Savannah Morning News. They want to comment on a story they're running tomorrow about Miss Sullivan being Mr. Crawford's illegitimate daughter and now working as your nanny. Samuel cursed under his breath. Tell them my attorney will be in touch. After Mrs. Jenkins retreated, Dr. Montgomery regarded them solemnly. Victoria's playing her final card, using Alexander Crawford's name to create a scandal that overshadows the truth about Paige's connection to Margaret. Who exactly was this man? Samuel asked, the question directed at Dr. Montgomery rather than Paige. Alexander Crawford was a state senator with national ambitions. Married into a prominent family, cultivated a public image as a family man, while maintaining numerous affairs. The doctor's expression turned bitter. After Margaret became pregnant, Victoria threatened to expose him unless he stayed away permanently. Last I heard, he was being considered for a cabinet position in Washington. Paige absorbed this information about her biological father, a man who had used her mother and abandoned her before she was even born. She felt oddly detached from the revelation, as if it described someone else's life. I don't care about Alexander Crawford, she said finally. He's not my family, but I won't let Victoria use him to hurt Charlotte or to dishonor Margaret's memory. Samuel nodded, a new resolve in his eyes. Then we face this head-on. No more secrets. No more hiding. He turned to Dr. Montgomery. Thomas, I need every piece of evidence you have regarding Victoria's deception 25 years ago. Medical records, correspondence, anything that proves she lied about Paige's death. What are you planning? The doctor asked. The truth. As Margaret wanted it told, before Victoria can spin her version, we release ours, complete with DNA evidence. As the men discussed strategy, Paige heard a small voice from the doorway. Miss Paige, why is everyone talking so loud? Charlotte stood there in her nightgown, her blonde curls tousled from sleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one arm. Paige knelt down to her level. We're just having a grown-up conversation, sweetie. Charlotte studied her with those eerily perceptive eyes. Is it about the bad lady? Is she coming back? No, honey. But there might be some confusing things happening in the next few days. Paige hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation to a 5-year-old. Remember how you said sometimes things are true, even if grown-ups don't talk about them? Charlotte nodded solemnly. Well, we've discovered something true that's been a secret for a long time. Something about your mommy and about me. That you're my sister, Charlotte said matter-of-factly. I already knew that. The adults exchanged startled glances. How did you know? Samuel asked gently, coming to kneel beside Paige. Mommy told me in my dreams. She said Miss Paige was her first flower, and I was her second flower, and someday we'd grow in the same garden. Charlotte looked at their shocked faces and shrugged. I thought everybody knew. Paige felt tears spring to her eyes again, as she pulled Charlotte into an embrace. This child who had somehow recognized her from the moment they met. Blood calling to blood across the barriers of time and deception. 3 days later, the story broke. Not in the scandalous exposé Victoria had planned, but in a dignified press release from the Drake family, accompanied by DNA evidence and a sworn statement from Dr. Montgomery about the events of 25 years ago. Alexander Crawford's name was never mentioned. The media frenzy that followed was intense but brief. Victoria Montgomery was found in a hotel in the Cayman Islands, attempting to transfer large sums of money from family accounts. The reopened investigation into Margaret's death revealed evidence of tampering with her car's brake lines, evidence that led to Victoria's arrest and eventual conviction. On a crisp October afternoon, Paige stood in the Drake family cemetery, a small bouquet of roses in her hands. The simple headstone before her read, Margaret Elizabeth Montgomery Drake, beloved wife and mother. I found my way back to you, Paige whispered, placing the flowers at the base of the stone. Just as you hoped I would. Samuel and Charlotte waited at a respectful distance. Hand in hand, when Paige rejoined them, Samuel slipped an arm around her shoulders. Ready to go home? He asked. Paige looked at them. Charlotte, her sister Samuel, her family now in a way neither of them had anticipated, and nodded. Yes, she said, her heart full. I'm ready, as they walked back toward the mansion. Dr. Montgomery emerged from his car in the driveway, a worried expression clouding his features. Samuel, he called, hurrying toward them. I've been going through Victoria's files. There's something you need to see. Something about the Drake family history. A legacy far older than any of us realized. What is it? Thomas, Samuel asked, frowning. The doctor glanced at Charlotte, then back at Samuel and Paige. Not now, with the child present, but it involves an inheritance, a fortune hidden generations ago, and a curse that's said to follow the Drake bloodline through the female descendants. Paige felt a chill despite the warm sunshine. The story that had seemed to reach its conclusion was, perhaps, only beginning. But whatever secrets still lurked in the Drake family history, whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the family she had finally found. The family that had been waiting for her all along.